Oh, this is it. Well, first, thank you so much for the invitation, and merci beaucoup. Thank you for the kind words. My Spanish is very rudimentary, I'm afraid. But what I understood was very nice, I must say. Very, very nice. Thanks so much. And it's all the more embarrassing that Javier speaks French much better than I do. So but I'll be speaking English for this particular talk. And again, thanks so much for the invitation. The topics I'm going to cover today, as was announced, are three topics which you might think are pretty disconnected, but in the end are linked to your own interest in the water industry. You care about sustainability, and here are three particular topics that are connected to the long view. So let me discuss those topics, and then I hope we have some time for discussion, so we have some kind of exchange. I think that will be very nice. So think of that as being an introduction, not as a series of answers, because as I'm going to emphasize, there are questions for which we economists haven't thought enough about, and we haven't quite done our homework, but it's going to be very important to reflect upon. So let me start with one of the big challenges of our 21st century, which is the digital economy and how it's going to impact our societies, because that's we are economists, so we have a particular competency in speaking about economic aspects, but it's going to have a very big impact on society as in general. And as you know, I mean, this is no news to you, it impacts most industries, and it can impact through very big innovations, but it also can impact through very small innovation. I mean, if you think about Uber, if you think about geo-tracking or peak load pricing, pre-registered credit cards, or mutual ratings between the driver and yourself, those are extremely small innovation. Actually, most of them already existed elsewhere. But it had a huge disruption on the taxi market, not just on the economic side, but of course politics, organization, public policy, and that's what we want to think about. We want to think about the common good, try to think about all those things. Perhaps, why don't I give you this so you won't have a torticolis? Okay. Okay, so let me just go through that. Now, the 21st century, and I will come back to that, is well known to be the knowledge-based century. It's going to be a huge opportunity. I mean, there's no question that we'll be richer at the end. But at the same time, there's a business challenge and there is a public policy challenge. And what I'm going to emphasize, of course, you will expect, is the key role of governance in dealing with this challenge. So let me start with a long list of economic and business challenges, so, and societal challenges, and starting with the antitrust of platforms. You may know that 3 out of the 5 top firms, biggest firms in the world, Google, Apple, Microsoft, are platforms, two-sided markets. 7 out of the top 10 startups, biggest startups, recent, unicorns alike, are also two-sided markets, a platform. So a platform is just getting together two sides of a market, or more sides, the sellers and the buyers. So the sellers, you can think of the sellers as being, for example, game developers, and the buyers as being you and me, the gamers. So if you're a video game platform, like the PlayStation, you have to bring everybody on board. If you think about Airbnb, you need to bring on board both the people who are going to rent their apartment and also the people who are going to, the tourists who are going to occupy those apartments, and so on and so forth. So lots of those platforms are actually bringing together multiple sides of the market. And if I had to classify them, I would say there are 2 kinds of platforms, and it's very rough. The first is the matching platforms. In the old time, when you wanted to meet someone or when you wanted to buy some good or service, you had your village, maybe your little town. It was a very, very restricted market. Today, it's the reverse. one click and you get the entire world. And now we have the reverse issue, which is that we don't have enough attention. We have another supply of opportunities to trade. So we have this information overload that has to be overcome. And therefore, you need platforms. You need platforms to find a match to your own taste, so someone who, or some good or service which fits your taste. And also about quality. So the platform are going to provide ratings about the quality, the reliability of the trading partner. And that's what basically Google, the search engine, for example, or Airbnb or eBay or Booking, we'll talk about Booking briefly later on. That's what they do. They bring you together, they give you information about whether this person matches you or is reliable. Then you have purely technological platforms which basically enable a better interaction. So if I want a Skype conversation with you, the issue is not that we have to meet. The issue is to have something else than just a sound, a phone conversation. So that's why we want to. So those are two kind of platforms. Visa, PlayStation also are also that kind of platform. Now, what are the challenges from the point of view of antitrust there is to keep competition. So we are in industries where you have, that's called the winner-take-all society, where you get very big firms, monopolies or tight oligopolies, and that's because, of course, of very high technological expenses, but also because of network anxieties. So think about Facebook. I want to be on Facebook because you're on Facebook. Or it could be indirect. So for example, it's not that I want to be on Chrome because you're on Chrome directly, but because Chrome will have handled more searches and therefore will be better able to predict. So what I'm looking for. And you look at the difference between Chrome and Bing, for example, in terms of searches, the big difference is on the small searches, the ones which do not occur very often. Same thing with Waze. So if you use Waze to predict your travel, the duration of your travel and where to go, if there are more people who use Waze, Waze will be better. And basically, it's going to lead to very highly concentrated markets. So in that world, you do want to have some competition, but the competition is going to be more dynamic. It's going to be contestability. But for that, you need for entrants to be able to enter if they are more efficient. And I would like to make a point here is that in general, they are going to be more efficient on a particular market niche. They are going to enter a niche. So for example, Amazon, which is now a giant and does everything, started just selling books on the web. If you think about Google, this big empire, it just started with a search engine. Uber is trying to do that now. And don't believe that Uber is in the taxis business because, anyway, in a few years there won't be any taxi business. There will be self-driving cars. Uber is trying to build and enter through a niche. So that's the important thing. And what we are worried about is that bundling by the incumbent actually will prevent this entry on the market niche. So that's something we must keep in mind. Another big antitrust issue deals with must-join platforms. So maybe some of you have followed the Bookings, Expedia business, antitrust lawsuits. Well, it was mostly with the governments, actually, France and Germany and a couple of others. I don't remember whether this arose in Spain. But you know that Bookings is able to ask very high fees from hotels, for example, 20, 25% sometimes. How come? Actually, Bookings is not a monopoly. You have Expedia and you have other websites you can go to. It's not even a monopoly. But the point is the following. If you are a consumer going to Booking, you have access to most hotels, and you know furthermore that you cannot find a better price elsewhere because Booking has asked for price coherence or most favored nation clause, which is the hotel is not allowed to charge a lower price elsewhere, including its own website. So you have all hotels on Bookings, and on top of that, you won't find a better price elsewhere. So you just stay on Booking, you don't compare. But now, if 20%, I'm giving a random number, if 20% of the consumers go only to bookings when they search for an hotel, then the hotel has to join Booking. It has to accept whatever fee is demanded by Booking. And that creates a prime. This is one of the many, many antitrust primes which arise in the new economy. So we economists have to think more about how to deal with those monopolies. We want innovation, so we don't want to beat on monopolies for the pleasure of beating on monopolies. We want just to keep them on their toes. Second issue has to do with privacy, and you are all concerned by this, of course. As you know, we're all spied upon by many platforms, and the big question is whether those platforms are going to use information for the common good. And to be sure, they have some incentive to do that, but this incentive is imperfect. So for example, they have an incentive to invest in security against breach. But of course, when there is a breach, part of the cost is borne by the platform itself, but part of the cost is borne by you and me. So they have an under-incentive to invest in security against breach. There is the issue of undue resell. So they promise you that they won't resell the data. They might do that later on. There is the issue of the right to oblivion. Are you sure really that those data are deleted later on? And there is the issue that we also bounded irrational ourselves. I mean, myself to start with. So, you know, when I go to a website, I click very quickly, I accept all the conditions without even reading, you know, because I'm so impatient and I accept all the conditions. Probably it will not even be efficient if I read everything, right? It's just like if you read all the conditions which are attached to your parking ticket, then you'll be spending your life doing exactly that. But of course, the question is, we also want the platform to have the data in somewhere to use the data, because lots of the benefits of the new economy will disappear if they didn't have access to those data. So let me just give you an example. What's very important in the new economy is that we have individual reputation. So, you know, as a customer of eBay or customer of Uber or whatever, I may have a reputation for being a decent person and not being a troublemaker or stealing from the others. And same thing, the driver, you can have an individual reputation for the seller, can have an individual reputation for being a decent person. So now you can build individual reputation when in the past you only had company reputation. So you could have entry by individuals into those markets, as we see in the new economy. Same thing, you know, for ad targeting. Actually, per se, it's a good thing that the ad we receive on the web are targeted to our own taste, as opposed to receiving random ads all the time. It's better if the ads are targeted to our own taste. So the challenge, and we economists haven't thought enough about that, is how to make sure that actually you keep the benefits of data, of the data for the firms, and at the same time you protect privacy. Now, there are proposals about ownership and portability of data. And I will say that it's an interesting proposal, but we haven't done our homework. So you might think, we as consumers, we contribute data to the platform. You know, we search, we purchase on platforms. We have tomorrow we'll have connected objects more and more. We belong to social network. We give a huge amount of information about ourselves on those platforms. And this information is appropriated entirely by the firms. That, by the way, creates barrier to entry, as I mentioned, because you know, the firms which have all the information actually have a competitive advantage compared to the entrants. But you might say, why don't we have ourselves, we could be the owner of their own data, so we could be owning the data we supply. Data about our purchasing track record or our taste or whatever. And then we could sell those data to companies, and the companies could process them, and then they will have intellectual property on the processing of those data. The problem with that is, how do you arrange that? How do you arrange that in terms of selling those data to companies? We don't know how to do it. You know, how do we price them? What kind of data? What subset? Nobody has thought about that. How do you standardize them? What kind of data collection you want to have? In general, you may have some link between data collection and processing of data. How do we invest in data reliability? Those platforms actually spend a lot of time trying to make sure that data are relatively reliable. So if you think about you know, the PageRank algorithm of Google, is trying to make sure that people don't game the system, so that actually, I mean, we all know that. Academics, I don't know if you're aware of that, but academics sometimes have false requests on their own website so that they will look like they are the most read person on earth, right? You can game the system, and you know what Google does is to try to make sure that you cannot game the system. They don't succeed completely, of course. And so on. And booking has the same issue, because you know, if you are a hotel or restaurant owner, you want to have a lot of comments which are favorable and, you know, 5-star ratings all the time. So how do you prevent gaming of that rating system? And of course, you also, you know, sometimes I hear Google and Amazon and Facebook are stealing your data. I have sympathy for the goal, but they are not stealing your data, because in a sense they are also providing you with free services, right, that they don't charge you for. You know, Chrome is a wonderful search engine. You can go to YouTube. You can belong to a social network. You can have Google Mail or something like that. So actually, they provide you with a number of free services. So if you move to consumer-owned data, we have to think also that those services will be for pay now. I don't have an answer. I'm just saying we need to think about that. That strikes me as a big policy debate, and that won't be the only one, but that strikes me as one of the big policy debates that we economists haven't done our homework on. Future of labor. So will we still have jobs in 50 years or 20 years? It's true that digital economy, artificial intelligence, robots, destroy jobs, especially tasks which can be codified pretty well. I want to insist on the fact it's not only the unskilled workers who are threatened, it's also the skilled people, you and me. So, you know, it could be a professor, maybe we won't have a job. You know, all our courses will come from Stanford, MIT, or Harvard. It's possible. There will be big platforms. If you are a general practitioner, a doctor, you know, you might use your job because there are softwares which will be as good as you are at finding patterns, and on top of that, they will have access to many more cases than the GP has. So a general practitioner is in trouble, lawyers, and so on and so forth. So it's actually across the board, there are lots of jobs which will be threatened. But of course, we know, and we have been knowing for 2 centuries, that any technological revolution also creates jobs. Fortunately, because otherwise there would not be 5% employment rate in Anglo-Saxon country or in Scandinavia or in Germany. I'm not talking about Spain and France, but you know, after 2 centuries of technological progress, there should be no work anymore. Same thing with, if you think that, you know, 41% of the US were employed in agriculture a century ago and only 2% now, you should think that there will be lots of unemployment in the US, which of course is not the case. I think a little difference with the past is that the mutation is faster and faster. So it goes faster and faster, and therefore it's more difficult to adjust to. And we have to think about 2 big issues. One is adaptability, because that means that we are going to change jobs more and more often. The days, you know, where we could have a job for our whole life, they are gone. Now the jobs will be changing multiple times during our career, And of course, there are skills which will remain, which will be useful, but we have to think about how we arrange to deal with this job mutation. And the second point I want to make is that there is no shortage of jobs. That's not the issue. The question is a shortage of jobs that people will want to take, which will be paid enough and the like. So that's the main thing that I'm concerned about. I don't know about Spain, but in France we have a big debate about whether someone who works in the new economy, like a driver for Uber, is an employee or independent contractor. Of course, Uber claims those are independent contractors, but in many countries like France or the UK or the US, there is this debate about whether they are employees or not. In my view, it's a very undecidable debate, which is they are both. I mean, think about, for example, a Uber driver. You know, the Uber driver has control about when he or she wants to drive, about the location, where to go, and so on. So in that sense, this driver is independent. At the same time, the Uber driver is not going to set prices. The prices are set by Uber. The cleanliness of cars have to be decided. It could be kicked out if you get bad ratings. Uber will kick you out. So it looks like a salaried person. And by the way, you do have independent professions which have exactly the same. So in France, the doctors don't choose their prices, even so most of them are independent, GPs, for example. Or if you have, a very important example, if you are a wine grower in a region, you need to basically comply with some quality criteria that you have no choice about, even so you are an independent person. So it's all confused. And instead of having those very lengthy debate, I think what we should have is a simple rule. The simple rule is that, you know, regulation, fiscal, social security matters should be the same for everyone, whether you're an independent person or you're a salaried person. And then it becomes a matter of efficiency about what decisions go to the platform and what decisions go to the worker. Will salaried work disappear? Well, we economists make so many mistakes in forecasting. Actually, I could tell you a little bit more why I think we are no good at forecasting and why I think we are good at doing other things. So if we are good at nothing, I would not be doing this job, of course. Leaving off the French taxpayer doesn't sound reasonable, but the forecasting is not a strong point of economists, and for multiple reasons, if you want to discuss during the debate. And that's certainly not something I'm going to take a lot of risk on, whether salaried work will disappear. My guess is it's not going to disappear, it's just going to decrease. There are factors which is going to favor independent work. As I mentioned earlier, we can now develop our individual reputations, okay? You know, we can be rated by other parties. We connect more easily with customers. You know, it's very easy if you're a painter, for example, to connect with the entire world as opposed to being represented by a gallery everywhere. We have a cheaper back office. You could have use the digital economy to have more performance-based schemes. At the same time, I think salaried work will remain. You know, you have large investments sometimes, so you cannot just do it yourself or just a few of yourself. Some people are more risk-averse, and they prefer to have a stable job and take no risk in terms of income. Sometimes the employer wants you to work only for them because of trade secrets, for example. And there are various reasons for why you'll still have some salaried work. But I don't want to bet on this because this is difficult. There are lots of questions which have to do with inequality and solidarity. It's not quite the same, but it's linked. Solidarity is in danger nowadays in the insurance market. You know, the insurance market is basically, for health insurance market, We don't know whether you or I will fall sick, and therefore we set up a scheme so that the person who becomes sick actually will be compensated through adequate health care. But of course, nowadays, where first the platforms have more and more information about you, Facebook knows everything about you. I exaggerate, but it knows a lot about you. Sometimes more than your insurer, actually. But also, we have genetics now. So with genetics, we'll be able to predict whether someone will have a disease or not. We can say, likely to have a cancer, likely to have whatever. And therefore, that's going to go against insurance, because you'll have smaller and smaller risk pools, meaning that you end up with specific offers to you if you are a good risk. So if you are unlikely to be sick, then the insurance company will make you very nice offers, except that, of course, the offers for the people who get a cancer will be very high. Now, in every country in which you have private insurance, health insurance, like Germany or Netherlands or Switzerland, you have some reason for some requirement that you don't discriminate in terms of policies. But even that is difficult to enforce. So imagine that an insurance company is Facebook. Facebook looks at your profile and says, I'm not going to offer an offer to Gonzalo. I'm not discriminating in his favor. But what I'm going to do is the participants in the water symposium forum are going to get this special deal, because I've studied that actually you are better health risk than the average population. And immediately the insurance disappears because the others will pay higher premium. So it's going to be very hard. So how do you think about, once you can make personalized offers to groups, for example, based on software algorithms, how do you make sure that you end up with solidarity? Inequality is another issue. I tend to view inequality as just another market failure. There's no reason why the market will give you the right distribution of income and wealth, whatever you want to think about it. But there's no denying that lately we have seen a tremendous increase in inequality with this phenomenon of polarization. So the highly skilled people are getting very high returns on their education, huge return. Having a master's degree, a BA, and especially a doctorate gives you very large returns nowadays. Whereas if you're unskilled, basically in many countries your wage has stagnated for, like in the US, for 25 or 30 years. So you have this polarization with a tendency for the middle class to disappear. My guess is that it's going to get worse. Again, I don't want to make too many predictions because I'm going to get it wrong. And if you know my predictions about the recent Brexit decision, about the recent American election, then you will not trust me anymore about making predictions, I can tell you. But my guess is that with the digital economy, it's going to get worse. Now, one possible reaction, which is pretty reasonable, is that we'll be globally wealthier with the digital economy because there are lots of wealth creation. And why don't we redistribute this windfall? Just like when you discover oil, for example, then you have this oil windfall and you distribute it. That's what they have done in Alaska, or that's what they do in Saudi Arabia, or they distribute it a bit to the people. However, there are two limits to that. And again, I don't think economists have thought very much about this. And we need to think much more about this because that's going to be it's already a crucial issue, but it's going to get worse. The first is that people have their own dignity. I think most people, the vast majority of people, want to work, not just receive an income. People have their dignity. The second one perhaps is less well known, but it's kind of obvious, which is today the wealth which is being created is being created by groups of 3, 4, 5 people who are completely international. Okay? So if you think about Google, if you think about Amazon, if you think about Microsoft, or the biotech, all the biotech companies which manufacture the new drugs, and they don't manufacture themselves, they're licensed to pharmaceutical companies, but they invent the new drugs. All those small companies, there are a few people, and those people are completely mobile, right? They speak English, they can go everywhere in the world, and they tend to go to the countries which give them the best environment. And you know, one of the frustration I have as a French person, I guess you feel the same, is that if you look at all those big firms, you know, Google, Amazon, all the ones I've cited, if you look at most of the biotech firms which produce the new molecules which are going to cure cancer and so on, they're all in Palo Alto, in Boston, and you know, a couple of in England, a couple of in Israel, and what are we doing in continental Europe? Because if we don't create the value, even so we have lots of human capital, that's a striking thing. I was working on venture capital for a report for the French government lately, and every foreigner was telling me, you know, you are very good engineers in France, you are very highly trained, and this is something I'm willing to believe. And I'm sure the same is true for Spain, but the question is, you know, what good does it do for us if the highest performers, the ones who invent and create the new value, they move abroad? And that's, I think, a very serious issue that we need to think about, because the tax base, it's not like an electricity company. The electricity company is not going to go abroad and vote with its feet. But those new entrepreneurs, they do that, and that's very scary, I must say. Policy responses, and again, we haven't done our homework. You know, my own feeling that protectionism is not going to do us any good. It's going to trigger retaliation. It's going to deprive us of specialization benefits. It's going to deprive us of competition. It's not a good thing. Technology denial is not a solution either. Just close your eyes and think that robots are not coming is not a solution. You just have your firms migrate abroad. And the answers actually are not that exciting. I mean, they are exciting, but they are not short-term exciting. And one of the big things, of course, is education. We must invest a lot in education. I mean, I was very disappointed to see what happened to the French educational system. So we still have an elite, 20%, which goes to extremely good school and are highly, they're performing very well. That's the one that those foreigners were telling me about. But if you look at the remaining 80%, it has gone down. So in the PISA ranking and other ranking, we are doing extremely poorly. So we have lots of field medalists, but we have, you know, our average mass ability is extremely bad. Okay? The training is crucial. Our universities have to improve. The governance of our university is not very good in France, I must say. And we have to improve our university. We have to improve your schools. And we also have to train people on the job. I mean, France spends 31 or 32 billion euros every year on retraining workers. And I can tell you, the outcome is pretty useless. And I think most people agree on that. And you know, this is not serious. You know, we are in a new society in which people are going to change jobs faster and faster. And if you don't have a good retraining system, then you sacrifice those people. And I think that's bad. And finally, and this is something I've been arguing for 15 years with Olivier Blanchard for France, is we need to change systems. So we need to move to a system in which you protect the worker like the Scandinavians do, as opposed to protecting the jobs. Because things are moving faster and faster, and we have to adapt our structures. We need to promote, probably I should skip a little bit of this. We need to promote innovation. I was going to talk a little bit about the conditions for industrial policy, but maybe we may skip that. Gonzalo, how long should I keep? That's fine. I'm just asking. Let me skip that. And if you are interested, the book which was mentioned earlier, The Economics of the Common Good, is coming out next month in Spain, so, and it's coming out in English in August. So let me say a few words about climate policy. So there, I think we economists have more to say in a sense, because that has been a long-standing topic, but we have been pretty unsuccessful at changing things. And I've been personally very vocal for many, many years on the particular topic. I'm speaking under the control of man, but at the French level, I've been trying to intervene with very little influence, to be honest. I always was very suspicious of a willingness to have very strong commitments for 2050. I mean, you know, when a politician promises you something for 2050, you should be suspicious, I think. And then you ask, okay, what do we do now? Oh, no, we promise for the long term. And we know that national interests are paramount. It's not like people are evil, but, you know, a politician is going to stand for national interests. I mean, there's a pretty clear incentive scheme. And you know, furthermore, that, you know, a country which will commit actually will have an incentive, will really want to basically abide by the commitment as incentive to join the binding agreement, because at least the others will do the same. But anyway, so I was, some of you may know, I was critical of the Paris COP21 process, which more or less abandoned the idea of carbon pricing and relied on non-committal pledges. I don't want to be too negative. I mean, the diagnostic was the right one, I thought. Also, this diagnostic was very much the diagnostic which was there in 1992. So not much change. But there was some good, and it was signed by everyone. So that was nice that it was signed by everyone, but it had a cost. You know, if you want a climate change agreement which is signed by Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, you are quite sure that there won't be strict measures in that agreement. And, you know, that's a trade-off that you face, in a sense. And there are lots of issues which have to do with the measurement, the reporting, the verification, and the mechanisms you are going to use. Now, I'm not saying nothing is being done. Actually, there have been a number of things done, and actually there have been good news, especially on solar energy and even wind power. So that's good. And you have some actions going on for various reasons. One is collateral damages. So if you have a coal-fired power plant, for example, it's going to emit SO2, it's going to emit NOx, which are local pollutants. And of course, it's also going to emit CO2, which is a global greenhouse gas, which is a global. So even if you are completely selfish, you maximize the welfare of your own country, you'll do something against those coal plants, right? Not enough, but you'll do something. Some large countries like China, of course, where there's a lot of action going on, also have large population, and they are going to be very much affected by global warming. And of course, there is some kind of posturing in the background too. And actually, the glimmer of hope you probably cannot read is that there are carbon prices in a number of countries. Most of them are completely insufficient. I had the good surprise that France actually is moving on to carbon price. It did 2 years ago. Of course, the model here is Sweden, which actually almost 30 years ago, 25 years ago, actually had a very big carbon price with lots of exemptions, but you know, at least did something very ambitious. Scandinavia, of course, is at the forefront as usual. So there's an issue, and I'm not going. The standard issue for an economist is that of free riding, which is I want you to do the effort and not me. I don't want to pay the cost of keeping this planet alive. That's exacerbated by leakages, carbon leakages, which is the fact that if I tax carbon in my home country, then the production, if I tax it at a high level, not at 10 euros or 5 euros per ton, if I use something more reasonable like 50 or 60 euros per ton, then there might be some migration of activity abroad. Same thing if I put a tax on gasoline, I add an extra tax on gasoline, then hopefully the drivers will drive a bit less and will buy cars which actually consume less gas or emit less CO2. But of course, I reduce the price of oil abroad, and there might be more driving abroad, and so on and so forth. And of course, there is also something which is less obvious, which is the strategic moves in anticipation of future renegotiation. Actually, being green is not a good thing when you want to negotiate, unfortunately. Just an example, every agreement that has, any binding agreement that has been signed, more or less, has given free pollution permits, tradable emission rights, to those who polluted the most. So if you are brown, actually the bad thing is that if you are non-virtuous, you actually have a bargaining chip to bargain in those negotiations because you are saying, look, I have no incentive to enter the agreement because it will cost me a lot of money. So all those things combined can explain why we end up with basically zero ambitions action. I'm a bit pessimistic here and probably too much. I just want to make it striking because my own view is that we don't do enough for the environment. I mean, this is, I was kind of shocked the day, the last day of COP21. Everybody basically declared victory. But not a single chief of state went back home and said, now, let's do costly things. So everybody declared victory, and nobody went back home and said, now we are going to pay a cost. And that's really something that I wrote an op-ed just that very day. It was a Saturday morning, I believe. Immediately I wrote an op-ed saying how furious I was because people were so complacent. Now, I don't want to be too nasty because the negotiation was very hard, to be honest, extremely hard to conduct. And, you know, I don't know if I would have been done better, but at least I would have been more modest in claiming victory over climate change. Okay, now economists, you know, they are simple-minded ideas, just they want a single price because they want, it's the old Pigouvian principle that you are well aware of, that basically you want people to make people accountable, people, individuals, firms, administrations, you want them to basically pay for what they inflict on society. So one price, and then you can think about deviation relative to this law of one price, but you know, as a benchmark, it's already a good thing to think about, and it's not that complicated. Now, how do you do that? One way is to do a carbon tax. The other familiar way is to have cap and trade, so tradable emission rights. And you have intermediate things where like a carbon price, which is you can use different instruments in your country, and basically you compute some kind of average of those instruments. And not everyone agrees on which one is the best. I've taken a stance, but honestly, I'm not sure I'm right. I'm more in favor of cap and trade for a reason I'm going to give in a minute. But honestly, it's a very technical debate. We don't quite know, and you know, reasonable people have different views on that. You know, some people prefer a carbon tax. It's fine with me. It's not my choice, but it's fine. And it's completely second order compared to what is going on. You know, once we have decided to have a price, some kind of economic regulation of the environment, then we can get into those technicalities. Let me just say a word about monitoring compliance on a carbon tax. So the proposal is that you will decide, for example, on the carbon tax, say 50 euros in each country, 50 euros per ton. The question is, who is going to implement this carbon tax? Well, the answer is the countries themselves. Now, they could already have a carbon tax today, and they don't do it, or they do it at very small levels. So due trust the countries to implement, spend resources to implement the carbon tax and to tax their own firms. And given they are not doing it now, I'm suspicious they will do it under an international agreement. Two other issues. One is that you can undo the tax. Actually, I'm afraid to say that in 2015, that's what the French did. They put a carbon tax, and then they reduced another tax on gas, just to offset, just for 1 year. But, you know, this is always doable. Given that you have multiple taxes, in particular on gas or fuel, basically what you can do is to put a carbon tax and then reduce the other taxes by an equal amount, and this will have no effect. And then the question is, what do we do with startups? What do we do with R&D? What do we do with whatever? Just to tell you what I mean by cap and trade. Cap and trade is the following, is that we know that we have a carbon budget. So carbon budget is how much we can still emit on net to get to 1.5, 2 degrees Celsius warming. Okay? So that gives you a total number of permits you can issue. And then you can have a cap and trade system. And what I propose is to make countries accountable. So countries are in charge of doing whatever they want to do. They can use a carbon tax inside, they can use startups, they can use whatever. But at the end of the year, they must have a number of permits which correspond to their pollution. Okay? And in a sense, that's motivated by the fact that in terms of global warming, we care only about how much CO2 France has emitted, not who emitted CO2 in France. We just don't care about that. Global warming depends only on the pollution by French actors, by French players, total pollution. So let me just, and there are difficult issues. And the difficult issues are the geopolitical issues. Negotiation, how do you do that? Enforcement, how do you do that? And we could discuss that later on. I just want to finish with a third topic, which I feel strongly about, which is corporate social responsibility. And try to clarify this, because it's very hard. If you read the literature on that, it's very hard to know what it is. And what I would like to say is that there are three different notions of corporate social responsibility. But before I say that, you have to ask yourself, why do we need corporate social responsibility? It may be obvious to you. It's not obvious. It's not completely obvious if you think about it. Our economic systems for the last century or so, or 2 centuries, have relied on Adam Smith plus Pigou. Okay, just to simplify. On the one hand, you have the invisible end of the market, where people pursue their self-interest in the pursuit of efficiency. And on the other hand, you had market failures, and there are many market failures, externalities, internalities, imperfect consumer protection, market power, inequality, and so on and so forth. So there are lots of market failures. And the state and the market are complementary. So they work together. The state is there to correct the market failures. And the question then is, if that's the case, why do we need corporate social responsibility? We have a state which is there exactly to correct market failure. Why should firms correct market failures? So somehow, if you want an answer to this question, it must be the case that not only there are market failures, but there are also state failures, there are government failures. So the government may fail itself for various reasons, and you know those reasons. I'm going to go fast through them. One is they may be captured by lobbies and other interest groups. They may pander to the electorate prejudices, so they may just do what the electorate wants to hear, and you know, just if the electorate is wrong, do it nonetheless. I mean, I'm struck by the fact that you know, politicians and political parties are more and more like polls. You know, they just try to know where the majority of voters, what the majority of voters is thinking, and do what the majority of workers is thinking. And I think that's the wrong thing, of course. They are there because they're supposed to have more information than, or have access to the expert that the voters do not have access to. Then there is the issue that there is not one state but 200 states in the world, and you cannot correct for child labor in another country, for example. It's not easy. I mean, there are ways, but it's not easy. And there are transaction costs and the like. So let me not get that, and let me finish with this, and then we'll have a discussion. So, okay, let's take for granted there is not only market failure, but there is governance failure. Still, what does corporate social responsibility mean? One of the first time I heard about corporate social responsibility, people say it's win-win. Basically, you're doing well for your company by doing good. So my first reaction was to laugh a bit, because who will be so stupid as to pollute and lose money at the same time, right? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, you have to be really crazy to both pollute and lose money on purpose, you know, unless you are a very nasty person, which I doubt you are. So, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. Now, I thought a little bit more about it, and actually, I think people who are using this expression have thought also more about it. And it has to do with corporate governance. And basically, trying to make sure that corporations take the long view. They are oriented toward the long term. Okay? We have seen, including in the financial crisis, that corporations may have a very short-term view. And that's bad. That's bad for the corporation itself. It's bad for the shareholders. It's bad for the creators. It may be bad for the employees. And the point I want to make is that it's often correlated with an anxiety. So, for example, when you don't maintain a system and you create some, you know, or you don't say a boat, for example, and you have an oil spill, okay? You made a lot of money because you didn't maintain the boat, but then at some point there is a catastrophe and there is an oil spill. Now, this is going to be bad for shareholders, of course, but it's also going to be bad for society, possibly, because of the oil spill. If you mismanage your firm, you make a lot of short-term profit, and then you go bankrupt. You know, think about Enron, for example, okay, or WorldCom. You go bankrupt, and of course, you know, your employees are left without job. It's not only the shareholders. So often taking a long-term view of your business is actually, which is about maximizing intertemporal profit. So for you economists, for those of you who are economists, it's no news, because the economists have always emphasized the fact that profit is not short-term profit. It's long-term profit, it's intertemporal profit. But it's true that you need to have the governance which goes with it. And that's one of the concepts, and that has several implications on what you should be doing if you want to be socially responsible. But that's not the only notion of corporate social responsibility. There is a second one, which I have called, by the way, it's work with Roland Benabou, who is a professor at Princeton, which I call delegated philanthropy. So basically, the firm is a channel for the expression of citizens' value. So we, stakeholders, either as consumers or as investors or as workers, we have a demand for that the corporation behave nicely. Okay? I don't want the people I buy from to use child labor, for example. There can be debate about what child labor means, but you know, by and large, there's a limit that you can put on how much child labor you use. I'm willing to pay a few cents more for my coffee if it's fair trade coffee. We are willing to pay a little bit more for green electricity. That's if we are consumers. If we are investors, we are willing to get a slightly lower return for a socially responsible investment. If we are workers, we are willing to possibly take a lower wage and work for an NGO because we are proud to work for an NGO. if this NGO does good for humanity. And basically, what we are doing here is asking the corporation to do philanthropy on our behalf. We are willing to pay a little bit more for the good, to get a smaller return, to get a smaller wage, just if the firm behaves well. So it's a demand on investors, on the corporations. And by the way, it's just profit maximization. I mean, don't believe that Starbucks is actually using fair trade coffee just to be nice. Of course, you know, they charge you a little bit more because you are willing to pay a bit more to get fair trade coffee, right? So, and by the way, Starbucks has other corporate social responsibility issues having to do with taxes, for example. But, you know, this is an important thing, which is there's no conflict with profit maximization. Basically, we delegate our philanthropy to the firm. And then there is a third category of philanthropy which has to do with insider-initiated philanthropy. And there are different views, both on the left and the right wing of the political spectrum, against this view, saying, you know, basically it's not to the managers of a firm to do philanthropy or the directors of a firm to do philanthropy. And it's very hard to distinguish between 2 and 3, because of course when you are nice and you do something useful for society, you also get some better reputation for your firm, and that may help you. And this is the last slide. And again, I would like to emphasize, this is a topic which has to do with sustainability, about a the long-term view. And this is a topic we know very little about, despite all the hype in the newspaper, in the media, and the corporation about this particular topic, we know very little about. There are limits to it, and actually that's why you also need the state. One limit is free riding, which I told you I'm willing to pay my coffee a bit more expensive, a bit more, if I get fair trade coffee. Now, am I willing to pay twice as much? Well, maybe not. You know, everybody has some selfishness, and that's, of course, going to limit the contributions. But I would say the limits are also on the information side. You need to have data collection, so you need to know what the actual policy of the firm is. I mean, it can be clean, but then use subcontractors who are not clean. And then you have to aggregate. You know, I told you Starbucks, you know, does fair trade. At the same time, it basically legally evades taxes, right? How do you combine the two? And you need to really understand it. I'm going to cut very through that, but you have to understand also whether the behavior is actually pro-social. And corporate social responsibility is a decentralized approach. It's the consumers, the investors, the workers, and the corporations which prefer. It's not the state. Okay? That's very important to understand. And it has all the benefits of decentralization. It has also the drawbacks of decentralization. So you must understand what is implied by a policy. So, you know, there are lots of examples I could give you, and I develop in the book I will publish next month, on when, you know, voters, for example, or citizens don't completely understand either geopolitical issues or the economic issues which are involved. And that's a difficulty. That's why most sovereign funds actually have stayed clear of all that and have tried to remain in the first interpretation, the win-win interpretation, that you take a long-term view and you try to improve corporate governance so that firms are not short-termist. But those are very difficult issues, and I just wanted to raise those issues. I think given the failure of the states, it's very important that we as citizens and corporations basically engage in a responsible way. So, you know, you need to substitute there, you need to substitute somewhat for the state. But at the same time, it's not there's no easy solution, because we face free riding, but we also face a number of informational issues that I could develop more, but they are very serious issues, and we have to think through all those things. And, I hope I haven't depressed you too much because, we economists, of course, I still have a lot to do, and we haven't done all those things. But at least we should be working on those issues because we want our societies to be sustainable, and we have to help with that. On this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. So I answer the right question.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your clear and courageous speech. You told us that at the very beginning that minor innovations, big disruptions in the digital area. Could I complicate a bit the creation? In Plus is at high speed. Which kind of problems put this high speed in digital area to the regulatory bodies, for instance, competition regulatory bodies? The high speed. The quickness in the digital changes, for instance, in Uber, in Booking, in Facebook, the very high speed, which...
Not in financial markets.
No, not in this digital area. In the sense that we had the habit to, after some decades of independent authorities, to deal with these kind of problems, but not so quick. I mean, and so the enforcing compensatory measures or foreseeing soft landings or giving long periods to adapt the sector which is affected, it's no more possible, or is it possible still?
I think it's a very good question, and it's true that things are moving faster and faster. So the standard regulatory tools are not appropriate. So when you regulated an electricity company, the technology didn't change. Even the water companies, the technology doesn't change that fast. I mean, there are other issues, but it's not. I mean, here in this economy, things change very quickly in a few years. And big data, for example, the changes which are going to happen because of big data are huge, and they're coming very fast. So the standard view of having a regulatory agency doesn't work that well. You can still use antitrust, but antitrust, we have to change the structure of antitrust a little bit because usually, same thing, it was for a slow-moving economy, so you get a decision on some abuse of dominant position, for example, after 5 years. That's too late.
Yeah.
That's too late given the speed of entry and change. It's too late. So we need to act more quickly and find rules. And I try to do that also through my research, to try to find rules which do not require too much information and basically tells you this behavior sounds fine and this behavior doesn't sound fine. So we have to act more quickly, and we economists have to do research to help the antitrust authorities to do that. Another point is about the labor market. Mm-hmm. The labor market is very complicated because in Southern Europe in particular, it's very complicated because it's very rigid. Because we have decided to protect jobs as opposed to protecting workers. And when you had a growing economy, just like the reconstruction economy after the war, for example, which was a catching up economy, it was pretty clear what had to be done. You had to build highways, you had to electrify the country, you had to build housing, everything could be forecast pretty well, and the economy was growing and blah, blah, blah. Now you see the cost of those policies now, which first in terms of labor market policies, which are very costly to the state, and also about rigidity. And things are going to get worse, I think, with the new economy, because jobs will be destroyed faster and faster. So we cannot keep protecting the jobs like this. We have to find a way of protecting the workers retraining them very efficiently, and of course insuring them against unemployment, and this and that. We need to have a system of protection of the workers, but the jobs are changing so fast that this policy, which already creates a lot of problems in our economy in Southern Europe, so France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece, that's going to get worse and worse, given the speed of changes. So we need to anticipate on that. I mean, there's no good recipe.
And in addition, you underline on your book that that we should change the focus in the labor market. For instance, not in the cost of licensing people, but in the temporary contracts. And so this in our country, as it is in France, is a very important issue, and you propose a quite discussed and polemic solution on that, which is the unique contract for which in different scales and according to the number of years you are there. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Okay. So my view is that both short-term contracts and open-ended long-term contracts are not good for society. Short-term contract, it's pretty clear because you basically keep people for a short time, then you put them unemployed, even if they
even for a week.
Even for a week. Now in France it's the same, in Spain the same. It's getting, I mean, the arbitrage by firms is awful. And so it's very costly also for the unemployment insurance, but it's costly also for the workers because they don't get any stability. They don't get human capital accumulation because you know that person, you're not going to keep that person. So if you're not going to keep that person, you're not going to train that person. And so that's not a very good contract. So I'm very much against these short-term contracts. At the same time, I found the long-term contracts too rigid. In France, you have a judge who decides whether this layoff, licenciement, this layoff is justified or not. Now, the judge doesn't have the information to do that. I mean, the firm knows whether it can usually employed should keep this job or not. The judge, that's not his fault or her fault. It's just too difficult to know. So what we proposed with Olivier Blanchard was a couple of things. The first is to make layoffs more flexible. And of course, that's a controversial part, as you might imagine. Make layoffs more flexible, but at the same time, and I think it goes together, to make firms accountable so as to make them responsible for what they do. So what we propose is a bonus-malus system. So basically, if you lay off workers, then you have to pay more to the social insurance fund. And if you keep your workers and you behave well, then you pay less. So basically, there's a redistribution from the firms that lay off the workers to the firms that keep the workers. So that was the first thing, is to try to make firms. Right now, it's the reverse, by the way. It's exactly the reverse. It's as if, you are used with pollution. It's as if a firm that doesn't pollute actually were paying for the pollution of firms who pollute. So it's a non-polluter pays principle. So you want to make firms accountable, that's the first thing. And then there is a political economy thing. And I think in France last year we didn't do it quite right, to be honest. If you make the labor market flexible today, then my guess, and it's just a guess, again, we are not very good at forecasting, but my guess is that lots of firms will be laying lots of workers immediately because there are a bunch of workers they don't want to keep, and they are going to think, this is not going to last. I'm going to throw away those workers very fast. And you throw them away at a point of time where there is a lot of unemployment. So they are going to increase the mass of unemployed people before even the jobs are created, the new job. Because my guess is that if we have more flexibility, the firms will create more normal jobs being, this contrat unique, which is the single contract in which it's an open-ended contract. The idea is that the firm keeps you, but you know, if there is a shock to its activity or it changes activity, it can lay you off. But it's an open-ended by definition. But those have to be created. They will be created, I think, with a new regime, but it will take time. So my own view is that for political economy reason and also for economic reason, you want to give grandfathering rights. I don't know, les droits du grand-père. Grandfathering rights, which is you basically say, you know, if you have those permanent jobs, you keep that. That's exactly what Renzi has done. Renzi has done that. You say, you know, if you have a permanent job, you keep it. But all the new jobs creation will be under the new regime.
The new standard.
And, you know, that keeps some people off the street, and also that avoids the economic crime that arose. Now, for the bonus-malus system, you know, for this, which, by the way, was created by Roosevelt it's called experience rating, but on a small scale in the US. I mean, Renzi did a little bit of that. Emmanuel Macron in his program in France has a little bit of that, but it's not, there's a lot of resistance to it.
Thank you, Professor. Before giving the floor to the attendants, my last question is about, you have told us that there are not only failures in the market side, but also in the state side. And in your books, you ask for reforming the state. And you always ask for a package reform, because a partial reform is not enough for all the problems which are gathered. And you also say that the reforms should be done in difficult times, as in Germany, in Canada, in the Scandinavian countries, etc. But I have two doubts on that. First, package reform, but shouldn't we make pilot reforms in a partial geographical or sectorial level in order to verify and check if these reforms are going on? And secondly, doing reforms in the bad times, in the bad difficult times, it puts more difficulty in order to get consensus that could maintain the sustainability of the reforms. And how do you deal with these doubts?
I think you have very good points, and of course you're trying when you are not sure about how to reform. Trying on a small scale is a good idea, so I completely agree with that. Now, about the bad times, it's more of an empirical fact that many of those which have deeply reformed the state have done so in bad times. So I think about Canada and Sweden or Germany and so on, Australia as well. They've done it in bad time. Now, I agree with you that actually there's an opposite argument which says actually in good times it's easier to basically have people accept, and the losers, you can compensate them more easily. But in practice, people don't realize in good times, they tend to delay things. It's like climate change, For climate change, as long as, that's a sad thing. As long as we don't burn, we can wait a bit longer. Why not wait a bit longer? And the cost, the immediate cost is zero. It doesn't make a difference. And
we need a disaster in order to...
Well, there's a little bit of that. And I mean, you should not be happy about what happened to your financial system. But, when I see France, it's pretty clear. France had no disaster. If you look at what happened in France in the last 30, 40 years, there was no major disaster. We had no financial crisis. The budget went from 35% to now the expenditures of the government in France is 57% of GDP, 57%. It used to be 35 in the 60s. So you see the evolution. Debt was 30% of GDP, but now it's 100%. It is very slow. Everything has been incredibly slow. So why reform? You just wait. You can wait 2 more years, right?
For the next.
And you wait 2 more years, and you wait 2 more years. It's exactly like climate change. That's the bad thing about slow-moving things. When things are moving slowly, nobody is willing to embrace a reform because you can always wait 2 more years. It's not, but you know, the accumulation of those 2 years becomes a disaster. So I'm not sure I'm right, and your arguments are very good. So I'm just saying, you know,
I'm not sure
when I see France and when I see those countries which have deeply reformed through packages, that we're in bad times, and the reason for packages, of course, that then basically everybody is affected. When you have only one group which is affected, this group is in the streets immediately, and the winners are not, they are elsewhere. They don't even know about it, or if they know about it, they don't care so much. I mean, they are not willing to commit to political engagement. So.
Thank you so much. Any other comment or question from the attendants? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you so
for
much
your points.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.